She descended the marble staircase in silk pajamas at 2:47 a.m., barefoot, her voice cutting through the estate like a blade through water, and said 5 words that stopped the most ruthless man in Seoul mid-execution. "Put the gun down, Min." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because the man holding that gun was Kang Min-jae, youngest boss in the Seoul underworld, a man forged in blood at 13 when his father was shot at a dinner table. A man who had spent a decade building an empire on the doctrine that mercy is suicide and attachment is death. His lieutenants stood frozen in the shadows of the foyer. Choi Sung-ho, his calculating right hand, watched with predatory stillness. And on his knees, zip-tied and bleeding, was Marcus Thompson, Min-jae's childhood friend, his most trusted guard, and the man whose betrayal had been caught on 3 separate security cameras selling syndicate intelligence to a rival faction. The evidence was irrefutable. The punishment was execution. This was how empires stayed standing. But the woman on the staircase, Amara Okafor, the corporate strategist he had married 18 months ago in an 11-minute courthouse ceremony for shipping routes and legitimacy, the wife he spoke to about weather and headlines, the stranger who slept in a separate wing of the house, had just issued a direct command to a man who did not take commands. And the most terrifying part? The gun lowered. Not all the way, but enough. Min-jae's finger eased off the trigger. His eyes, cold, unreadable, lethal, shifted from Marcus's temple to the woman standing 10 feet above him in silk and conviction. The security cameras caught it all. The marble floor slick with rain tracked in from the courtyard. The lieutenants in Tom Ford and tactical gear holding their breath. The moment when the most feared man in Seoul made a choice no one in that room could have predicted. He dragged Marcus to the basement instead of ending him. Locked the door. Dismissed his men with a single gesture. And when the estate fell silent except for the hum of surveillance equipment and his mother's disapproval radiating from her wing of the house, Kang Min-jae turned to his wife of 18 months, a woman he had kissed exactly twice, both times with the emotional engagement of a business transaction, and asked the question that would detonate everything that came after. Why do you care? Now, before I tell you what pushed a woman who married a stranger for a green card and strategic advantage to risk everything to save a man she barely knew, let me take you back 18 months to a conference table in Lagos and a marriage that was never supposed to mean anything. Amara Okafor met Kang Min-jae exactly twice before their wedding. The first time was across a polished conference table in her father's Lagos office. Her in a charcoal Armani pantsuit presenting risk assessments for West African logistics corridors. Him in Brioni asking questions in flawless English that told her he'd already made his decision before she opened her PowerPoint. The second time was at the Seoul family court 16 days later. No white dress. No cherry blossoms. 2 translators, for witnesses hired from a temp agency. 1 notary, who looked bored. The entire ceremony took 11 minutes, including the photo for the marriage registry. She got a spousal visa, a Black American Express with no spending limit, and a 10,000 square foot estate in Songbuk-dong, where the air smelled like old money and the neighbors were chaebols and politicians who pretended not to notice the armed men in the courtyard. He got access to shipping routes controlled by her father's network and a wife educated enough, polished enough, and beautiful enough to sit beside him at charity galas without raising questions about what a man like him was doing with all that wealth. They were strangers with compatible objectives. She had the East Wing. He had the West. They ate breakfast separately. They attended events together with the chemistry of colleagues. They had sex twice in 18 months, both times efficient, wordless, clinical, followed immediately by separate showers and the sound of doors locking. It was a rational arrangement. Amara had convinced herself that rational was sustainable, that a marriage built on logic couldn't betray you the way love could, that surviving was enough. And then, at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, she walked downstairs for a glass of water and saw her husband, the stranger she had married for a green card, pressing a Glock to the head of the only person in that entire house who had ever asked how her day was. Marcus Thompson, The guard who remembered she took her coffee black, who learned 3 words of Igbo to greet her properly, who stood post outside her wing but never made her feel surveilled, only safe. And Amara Okafor, corporate strategist, survivor, woman who had spent 29 years building armor thick enough to survive anything, made a decision that shattered every carefully constructed wall in her life. She walked down those stairs. She looked at the man she had married, and she gave him an order. Put the gun down, Min. What happened next would unravel 18 months of careful distance, expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the syndicate, force a reckoning with a mother who had turned love into a weapon, and teach 2 people who thought they could survive on logic alone that some risks are worth taking, even when the cost might be everything. But it started here, in a foyer, at 2:47 a.m., with 5 words and a gun that lowered just enough to let a man live, and a marriage began. The evidence arrived at 11:47 p.m. in a manila envelope hand-delivered by one of Chairman Jiang's couriers, a calculated insult, having a rival faction expose the rot inside Min-jae's own house. 3 USB drives, 14 encrypted messages, wire transfer receipts totaling 847 million Korean wons, and security footage from 4 different angles showing Marcus Thompson in a basement parking garage in Itaewon, handing a leather portfolio to a man in a surgical mask who worked for the Jiang syndicate. Min-jae watched the footage 6 times in his office while his lieutenants assembled in the foyer below. No audio. Didn't need it. The timestamps told the story. The portfolio was syndicate intelligence, shipping routes, personnel files, the location of 3 safe houses in Gangnam. Marcus had sold them all. He found Marcus in the East Wing security station, Jan watching camera feeds like he did every night, coffee going cold beside the keyboard. He didn't run, didn't deny it, just stood when Min-jae entered, removed his service weapon, placed it on the desk, and said 4 words, "I'm sorry, Hyungnim." Min-jae hit him once. Methodical, clinical. The way his father had taught him before the dinner table and the gunshots and the funeral, where 13-year-old Min-jae didn't cry, because crying was for people who still believed the world was fair. He dragged Marcus down 2 flights of stairs by the collar, the fabric tearing, Marcus's face already swelling. The lieutenants were waiting. 6 men in suits worth more than most Seoul apartments, watching their boss haul a traitor across Italian marble like a butchered animal. Choi Sung-ho stood at Min-jae's right shoulder, perfectly groomed, perfectly calm, voice pitched low enough that only Min-jae could hear. Mercy is suicide. You taught us that. Min-jae threw Marcus into the center of the foyer. The evidence scattered across the floor, printed messages, bank statements, photographs. Accusations rendered in ink and paper. Loyalty, Min-jae said, his voice carrying through the space with the weight of doctrine, is the only currency that matters in this world. Blood is the only contract that holds. He pulled the Glock from his shoulder holster, checked the chamber out of habit, let the sound of the slide echo. My father died because he trusted the wrong lieutenant. I will not make his mistake. Marcus didn't beg. Stayed on his knees, hands behind his head, resignation carved into every line of his face. 23 years of friendship ending on marble at 2:47 a.m. because Min-jae had learned long ago that sentiment was just another word for weakness. The gun rose. Min-jae's finger found the trigger. 2 pounds of pressure. That's all it would take. Then a voice from the staircase, clear and steady and completely unafraid. Put the gun down, Min. The silence that followed had texture. Wait. Every lieutenant turned. Sung-ho's jaw tightened. Marcus's eyes went wide. And Min-jae, who had spent a decade building a reputation on the principle that no one, not even blood, could tell him what to do, felt something crack in the architecture of his certainty. Amara stood 10 steps up, barefoot in silk pajamas the color of midnight, her hand resting on the banister like she was steadying herself against the full force of what she'd just done. No fear in her face. No performance. Just a woman who had decided, in that instant, that she would not watch a man die in her house without saying something. The gun lowered. Not all the way, but halfway. Enough that Marcus gasped, a sound like drowning reversed. Basement, Min-jae said, his voice granite. 2 guards moved immediately, hauling Marcus through the service door, his blood leaving a smear across the floor. The other lieutenants dispersed without needing to be told. Sung-ho lingered for 3 seconds, his gaze moving between Min-jae and Amara with the cold calculation of a man already recalculating every assumption. Then they were alone. Min-jae holstered the gun, looked up at his wife of 18 months. The stranger, the acquisition, the woman who had just committed an act of interference that should have ended with her banishment or worse. His voice, when it came, was quiet. Dangerous. The kind of quiet that preceded violence or confession, and neither of them knew which. Why do you care? Amara didn't answer him immediately. Couldn't. Because the honest answer required rewinding 18 months to a courthouse in Yeonggu where she signed her name beside a stranger's and became Mrs. Kang in a ceremony so sterile it could have been a deposition. The wedding photographer, hired, she later learned, from the same agency that provided the witnesses, had taken exactly 12 photos. Min-jae's assistant emailed her 3, the signing, the bow to the officiant, and 1 staged shot of them standing side by side in front of the Seoul family court seal. In that photo, there was exactly 4 inches of space between their bodies. Neither of them was smiling. She looked like a woman who had just signed a contract. He looked like a man who had just acquired an asset. The first night in the Songbuk-dong estate, a housekeeper showed her to the East Wing. Her bedroom was larger than her entire apartment in Lagos. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden she would never use, a walk-in closet already filled with clothes in her exact size that she had never ordered, a bathroom with heated floors, and a soaking tub. Min-jae's assistant had left an orientation packet on the bed, Wi-Fi password, household staff schedule, a list of restaurants that delivered, and a single line at the bottom in English. The West Wing is private. She unpacked alone, ate dinner alone in a dining room built for 12, went to sleep in a bed that smelled like expensive detergent and nobody. Min-jae knocked once, at 11:30 p.m., his silhouette filling the doorframe. "We should," he said, and didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. This was the transaction's biological component. She nodded. He crossed the room with the mechanical efficiency of a man checking items off a list. It lasted 9 minutes. He left immediately after, his dress shirt already rebut-toned, and said, "Good night, Mrs. Kang," like he was dismissing an employee. She learned the house's real architecture in the first month. The beautiful rooms were decorative. The actual business happened in basements and soundproofed offices and places the housekeeper warned her never to go. She learned that the men who came for meetings carried guns under 15 million Korean won suits. She learned that sometimes Min-jae came home at 4 a.m. with blood on his cuffs that wasn't his. She learned to hear the difference between social gatherings and the kind of silence that meant someone was being disciplined 3 floors below her bedroom. She was insulated from it, complicit in it. A woman living in a palace built on violence she never witnessed but always felt, like tremors from an earthquake happening underground. Marcus changed that, for months in. She'd been standing in the kitchen at 2 a.m., jet-lagged and disoriented, trying to figure out the espresso machine, when he appeared in the doorway. 6'2", muscles that suggested violence as profession, but a face that softened when he said, "Mrs. Kang, let me help you with that." He made her coffee, asked how she was adjusting, listened when she admitted Seoul felt lonely. He started greeting her in Igbo after that. New. 3 syllables that meant someone had cared enough to learn. He was the one who told her which staff she could trust, who warned her when Min-jae was in a dangerous mood, who stood outside her wing not as a guard, but as the only person in that entire house who saw her as something other than the boss's foreign acquisition. Marcus remembered she took her coffee black, asked about the book she was reading, noticed when she was homesick and didn't ask invasive questions, just existed as proof that someone registered her presence as matching. The loneliness accumulated slowly. Breakfast alone. Charity galas where she smiled beside a husband who introduced her as my wife, but never by name. Nights in a bed built for two, occupied by one. 18 months of performing a marriage for an audience of staff and syndicate members while slowly disappearing into irrelevance. And then tonight, Marcus on his knees. Evidence scattered like accusations. A gun rising. And Amara realized with sudden, clarifying horror. If Marcus died, there would be no one left in this house who knew her name. So she descended the stairs. She said 5 words. She stopped an execution not because she was brave, but because the alternative was becoming a ghost in her own life. Min-jae stood in the foyer below, waiting for an answer that would make sense of what she'd done. Because, Amara said, her voice steadier than she felt, he's the only person in this house who treats me like I'm human. Min-jae had said no. Actually said the word, standing in that foyer at 3:17 a.m. after she'd given him her answer, his expression unreadable in the way that meant he was working very hard to feel nothing. The basement is not for you. Go back to your wing. Not a suggestion. An order. The kind of order that, in his world, ended conversations. Amara waited until 4:30 a.m., until the estate went quiet except for the hum of security systems and Min-jae's office door closing 2 floors above. Then she took the service stairs down past the wine cellar, past the storage rooms, to the reinforced door the housekeeper had told her never to open. It wasn't locked. That should have been her first warning. The basement was exactly what she'd imagined and worse. Concrete floors with drains built in, fluorescent lights that made everything look clinical and wrong, the smell of disinfectant failing to cover something older and more permanent. Marcus was chained to an exposed pipe in the corner, wrists zip-tied, face swollen on the left side where Min-jae had hit him. His shirt was torn. Blood had dried at his hairline. He looked up when she entered, and something like resignation crossed his face. "Mrs. Kang, you shouldn't be here. Neither should you." Ife Namdi arrived 31 hours later with 2 suitcases, a carry-on full of electronics Amara didn't recognize, and a cover story about needing to escape a bad breakup. She hugged Amara in the guest room, the first physical affection Amara had felt in 18 months, and said, "Okay, tell me everything." So Amara did. The gun, the basement, Marcus's confession, the creeping certainty that Sung-ho had orchestrated the entire betrayal to eliminate competition and isolate Min-jae further. Ife listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to something colder and more focused. When Amara finished, Ife opened her laptop. "Choi Sung-ho, give me everything you know about him." "Why? What can you do?" "Baby." Ife smiled without warmth. "I've been doing corporate espionage since I was 22. Politicians, CEOs, hedge fund managers, they all think they're untouchable until someone follows their money. Criminals are sloppier. They rely on fear instead of covering their tracks." What Ife had, Amara learned over the next 72 hours, were connections that made Amara's corporate background look quaint. Former intelligence analysts turned private contractors. Hackers who could trace cryptocurrency through a dozen shell companies. A forensic accountant in Singapore who owed Ife a favor from a job in Manila that Ife refused to detail. They worked in the guest room with the door locked, mapping Sung-ho's financial trail across 3 laptops and 2 monitors Ife had shipped from a contact in Itaewon. Wire transfers to accounts in the Caymans. Payments to a digital security firm that specialized in encrypted communications. And, buried under 6 layers of corporate ownership, a 340 million Korean won's deposit made to Sung-ho's sister's account exactly 2 weeks before Marcus's betrayal was exposed. "He paid for this," Ife said, highlighting the transaction. "Someone gave him money to set Marcus up. We just need to figure out who." Parallel to the investigation, something else was shifting in the house. Min-jae started appearing at breakfast. Not every day, but 3 times that first week. He sat across from Amara with coffee and the Jungang Ilbo, and instead of reading in silence, he asked questions. About Lagos. About her mother, who had died when Amara was 16. about why she'd agreed to marry a stranger. Survival, Amara said, the honesty surprising her. I was good at my job, but my father's business was built on relationships I couldn't inherit. Marriage gave me legitimacy. And you chose me. You offered the most. She met his eyes. Why did you choose me? You didn't ask questions. He folded the paper. And you looked like someone who understood that sentiment is a liability. Did I? Min-jae was quiet for a long time. Yes. The real conversation happened on the 8th night, in his office at 1 a.m. Amara had knocked, intending to tell him about Ife's findings. Instead, she found him at the window overlooking the garden, a glass of whiskey untouched on his desk. My father died in a restaurant, he said without preamble. Sam Mayan okay, in Jongyo. We were celebrating my admission to SNU. He ordered Ning Mayan, extra mustard, the way he always did. Min-jae's voice was flat, factual. His lieutenant shot him 3 times. Once in the chest, twice in the head. Very efficient. How old were you? 13. And your mother? Stopped speaking for 6 months. When she started again, the first thing she said was, never trust anyone enough to sit with your back to the door. He turned from the window. That's what love gave her. Silence and survival instructions. Amara stood, crossed to where he was standing. Have you ever cried? About any of it? No, not once. Crying doesn't bring people back. It doesn't make you stronger. It's just noise. Amara felt something break in her chest, not for herself, but for the 13-year-old boy who had taught himself that grief was weakness. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Min-jae looked at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then his phone rang, Sung-ho's name on the screen, and the moment fractured. But something had shifted, and they both felt it. The invitation arrived on cream cardstock, hand-delivered by the housekeeper at 9 a.m. T. The traditional room. 2 p.m. Kong hygiene. Not a request. A summons. Amara had seen Min-jae's mother exactly 7 times in 18 months. Twice at charity galas where hygiene had looked through her like she was decorative glass. Once at a family dinner where the older woman spoke only Korean despite knowing Amara didn't understand. And 4 times in passing in the estate hallways where hygiene's silence carried more contempt than words ever could. She'd never been invited to the traditional room. No one had. It was hygiene's domain. A space preserved exactly as it had been when Min-jae's father was alive. All hanji screens and low lacquered tables, and the faint smell of chrysanthemum incense. Amara dressed carefully. Conservative charcoal dress, minimal jewelry, her natural hair pulled back in a way that suggested respect without submission. Ife helped with her eyeliner and whispered, "You need me to come with you?" "No. This is something I have to do alone." Hygiene was waiting, seated in perfect formal posture, her hanbok the color of winter, pale cream and lavender with embroidery so delicate it looked like frost. She'd arranged the tea service herself, porcelain cups, a cast-iron pot, small plates of yagua and dasik. The setup was beautiful. The intent was a threat. "Mrs. Kong," Hygiene said in English, her accent impeccable, her tone arctic. "Please sit." Amara sat. Hygiene poured tea with the precision of ritual, each movement controlled, performative. She slid a cup across the table without their fingers touching. "You stopped my son from doing what was necessary," Hygiene said. No preamble. No pretense. Marcus Thompson betrayed this family. The punishment is death. You interfered. I asked him to reconsider. You made him hesitate. Hygiene's eyes were sharp, assessing. Do you understand what you've done? In this world, hesitation is weakness. Weakness is death. You've made Min-jae vulnerable. I made him human. Human. Hygiene smiled without warmth. Foreign wives always believe they can civilize us. Soften us. As if brutality is a cultural failing and not a survival mechanism. She sipped her tea. You are decorative, Mrs. Kong. Legitimacy for the business. A pretty face at the galas. You were never meant to have opinions about how this house is run. Amara set down her cup with deliberate care. You're afraid of me. Excuse me. You're afraid that I'm teaching your son something you spent 30 years trying to beat out of him, that he's allowed to feel things. That love isn't a liability. That being human doesn't mean being weak. Amara leaned forward slightly. You didn't raise a son, Mrs. Kang. You raised a weapon, and you're terrified that I'm trying to unmake him. The silence that followed had edges. Hygiene's composure didn't crack. She was too disciplined for that, but something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or rage so refined it looked like patience. You think you understand this world, Hygiene said quietly. You think because you married into it, because you sleep in this house and wear expensive clothes, that you comprehend what it costs to survive here. She refilled her own tea with movements so controlled they looked choreographed. Let me tell you what I learned, Mrs. Kang, so you don't have to learn it the way I did. She paused, sipped, continued. I love my husband. Completely. Recklessly. The kind of love that makes you foolish. I thought love would protect us. That if we just loved each other enough, the violence would stay outside our door. Her voice never wavered. And then I watched 3 bullets end him at a restaurant table while our 13-year-old son sat frozen in his chair, covered in his father's blood. Amara felt ice settle in her stomach. I made Min-jae into what he is because human men don't survive in this world. Soft men die. Men who hesitate get buried. I taught him to be hard because hardness kept him alive when love got his father killed. Hygiene met Amara's eyes. You want to teach him to feel again? Fine. But understand this. The moment he lets his guard down is the moment someone puts a bullet in him. And you will learn what I learned. That love is just another word for the thing that gets the people you care about killed. Hygiene stood, smoothing her hanbok with elegant precision. Finish your tea, Mrs. Kang. And then go back to your wing and remember your place. You are not saving my son. You are sentencing him to death. She left Amara alone in the traditional room, surrounded by the ghosts of a family that had loved once and paid for it in blood. Min-jae appeared outside Amara's wing at 8 p.m. 3 days after the tea ceremony, wearing a black suit instead of his usual gray, his expression unreadable in the way that now felt less like control and more like armor badly fitted. Come with me, he said. Not a question, but not quite an order either. She went. The car ride took 17 minutes through Jongnyo-gu, Min-jae silent in the back seat, his driver navigating streets that got narrower and older until they stopped in front of a building Amara had passed a dozen times without noticing. Unmarked door, no signage, the kind of place that existed for people who already knew where it was. Min-jae dismissed the driver, unlocked the door himself with a key he produced from his jacket. Inside was darkness and the smell of aged wood and something else, the particular stillness of a space preserved exactly as it had been, like a museum to a single terrible night. He turned on the lights. It wasn't a restaurant anymore. The kitchen had been gutted, the other tables removed. What remained was a private room with exposed brick, minimalist furniture, and one table in the center, lacquered wood, traditional low seating, the surface polished to a mirror shine. Sam mine okay, Min-jae said quietly. It closed 6 months after my father died. Bad for business, having a boss executed at table 12. I bought the building when I was 23. Converted it into a members club that doesn't have members. He crossed to the table. I kept this exactly as it was. Amara followed him. Sat when he gestured to the cushion across from where he lowered himself with deliberate, mechanical precision. He was sitting in his father's chair. She understood that without being told. We were celebrating, Min-jae said, his voice flat, factual, the tone of someone reciting a report. My acceptance to Seoul National University. Engineering. My father was so proud. Kept telling everyone his son was going to build bridges instead of burning them. He touched the table's edge. He ordered naengmyeon. Extra mustard, extra vinegar, the way he always did. My mother ordered bibimbap. I had galbi because I was 13 and still thought being a man meant eating meat. His jaw tightened. His lieutenant, Kim Tae-sung, 20 years of service, godfather to me, man my father trusted more than anyone, walked in at 8:47 p.m. My father smiled, waved him over. Kim sat down right where you're sitting now. Amara felt the ghost of it, the shape of violence in the negative space. He pulled the gun under the table. My father didn't see it coming. First shot went through his chest. I heard my mother scream before I understood what was happening. Second and third hit his head before he could fall forward. Min-jae's voice didn't waver, didn't break. There was Ning-mayan in his hair, blood in the mustard. My mother stopped screaming and just froze, like someone had unplugged her. Min-jae. The police came, took statements, did nothing because everyone knew what my father was, and dead criminals don't get justice. He looked at Amara for the first time since they'd sat down. My mother didn't speak for 6 months, and when she finally did, she didn't cry, didn't grieve. She just looked at me and said, "Never trust anyone enough to sit with your back to the door." That's when you became this, Amara said softly. There was no other option. I was 13. My father's enemies thought his death meant the organization would collapse. So I became what I needed to be. Cold, controlled, unkillable. His voice finally cracked, just slightly. My mother made me into a weapon because weapons don't die the way fathers do. And now I don't know how to be anything else. He met her eyes. I don't know how to be close to someone without destroying them. Everyone I've ever cared about either died or turned into what my mother is, alive but empty. I don't want that for you. Amara reached across the table, slowly, giving him time to pull away. Her fingers found his hand, the same hand that had held a gun to Marcus's head, that had signed execution orders, that had never been held without strategy or violence. His entire body went rigid. For 3 seconds, she thought he might bolt, but he didn't. She laced her fingers through his, held on. Neither of them spoke. They sat like that for 11 minutes. Amara counted, watching the clock on the wall behind his head. In a restaurant where his father had died and his childhood had ended and the architecture of his entire life had been determined by 3 gunshots and a bowl of cold noodles. When Min-jae finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "This is the first time someone has touched me like this since I was a child." "I know," Amara said. She didn't let go. The evidence arrived at 4 a.m. in an encrypted file sent simultaneously to every member of the Syndicate Council. 12 men who had built empires on blood and silence. Men who didn't respond to threats, but deleted them. The subject line was 2 words, Kang compromised. Min-jae's phone lit up 17 times before he answered. The council head, Park Jin-woo, 63, laundered money through semiconductor manufacturing, spoke without preamble. "We have a problem. Meeting. Your office. 9 a.m. Non-negotiable." By the time Min-jae reached his study, Sung-ho had already forwarded him the file. 47 pages of fabricated evidence so meticulously constructed it would have convinced anyone who didn't know better. Encrypted messages between Amara and a Jang Syndicate operative, wire transfers from accounts traced to her father's Lagos network, meeting records showing her in Itaewon the same night's intelligence was sold, even airport surveillance footage edited to suggest clandestine travel. The narrative was surgical. Amara wasn't just complicit in Marcus's betrayal. She was the architect. The American agent who had married her way into the organization, gained Min-jae's trust, and systematically dismantled it from inside. Min-jae read it twice. His hands didn't shake. His expression didn't change. But Amara, watching from the doorway in the same position she'd stood 18 months ago on their wedding night, saw something crack behind his eyes. "This is Sung-ho," she said. "I know. You believe me?" He looked at her for 5 seconds that felt like cross-examination. "Yes. Then we fight. The council won't care what I believe. The evidence is fake, and I can prove it." Amara crossed to his desk. "Ife and I have been tracking Sung-ho's finances for 2 weeks. We know where the money came from. We know who paid him. And we know exactly how he fabricated this. Amara, these men don't respond to PowerPoints. They respond to blood. Then I'll give them both." The council arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. 12 men in suits worth more than most Seoul apartments. Faces carved from expectation and violence. They filled Min-jae's conference room like a tribunal, Park Jin-woo at the head, Sung-ho standing against the wall with an expression of calculated concern that made Amara want to shatter his teeth. Park didn't sit. Kang Min-jae, we've reviewed the evidence. Your wife is a liability. The recommendation is execution. Today, she's entitled to a defense, Min-jae said, his voice controlled in the way that meant he was barely holding himself together. She's entitled to nothing. I'll defend myself. Amara stepped into the conference room before Min-jae could stop her. No lawyers. No guards. Just herself in a black suit and the USB drive Ife had prepared, already connected to the room's display system. Mrs. Kang, Park said with the tone of a man addressing an insect. You should leave. This doesn't concern. It concerns me entirely, since you're discussing my execution. She opened her laptop. I'm going to take 20 minutes. You're going to listen. And then you're going to decide whether you want to kill an innocent woman or the man who's been stealing from all of you for 3 years. She clicked to the first slide. For the next 20 minutes, Amara dismantled Sung-ho piece by piece. She showed them wire transfers from Sung-ho's sister's account, the 340 million Korean won's payment made 2 weeks before Marcus's arrest. She showed them shell companies Sung-ho controlled, funneling syndicate funds into private accounts in the Caymans. She showed them the metadata on the fabricated messages, created last week, not 18 months ago, time-stamped after midnight in Sung-ho's own apartment complex based on IP geolocation Ife's hacker had traced. She showed them meeting records proving Sung-ho, not Amara, had been in Itaewon on the nights intelligence was sold. She showed them airport footage, the real footage, not the edited version, showing Sung-ho meeting with Jang operatives while she was provably in Lagos visiting her father. And finally, she showed them bank records proving Sung-ho had received 890 million Korean wons from Hygiene over 3 years. Payments categorized as consulting fees. Hush money to orchestrate exactly this kind of chaos. The room was silent when she finished. Park's expression had shifted from dismissal to calculation. The other council members exchanged glances that suggested Sung-ho's life expectancy had just shortened dramatically. Amara closed her laptop, turned to face Sung-ho directly. He was pale, jaw clenched, the performance of concern replaced by naked fury. You underestimated me because I'm a woman, Amara said, her voice carrying through the silence like a blade. You thought I was decorative, an acquisition, too foreign, too weak, too irrelevant to matter. She smiled without warmth. You're going to die because I'm smarter than you. Park Jin-woo looked at Min-jae. Handle your house. The meeting ended. Sung-ho was escorted out by men who weren't gentle, and Amara stood in the center of the conference room, alive, vindicated, and more powerful than she had ever felt in her life. Min-jae waited until they were alone. Then he did something she'd never seen. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 18 months. Thank you, he said. The dinner was Sung-ho's idea, proposed 3 days after the council meeting with the deference of a man who knew he was living on borrowed time. A private meal. To clear the air. Just the core family and lieutenants. No guards. A gesture of trust. Min-jae should have said no. Would have, if Amara hadn't leaned across the breakfast table and said, let him come. We'll be ready. They set the table in the main dining room at 8 p.m., the same configuration Amara realized with ice in her stomach as the restaurant where Min-jae's father had died. Min-jae at the head, Amara to his right. For lieutenants, including Sung-ho, Hygiene had declined, claiming a headache, which should have been the second warning. The first course arrived at 8:34 p.m. Japchae, galbi, banchan arranged like an apology. Sung-ho sat 3 seats down, performing contrition with the precision of a man who had practiced in mirrors. He raised his glass. To family. And second chances. The explosion came at 8:47 p.m. The East Wing detonated first, a shaped charge that took out the security hub and half the surveillance system. Then the courtyard. Then the service entrance. Synchronized. Surgical. The kind of attack that required weeks of planning and access only an insider would have. The lights died. Emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in red. And through the smoke and the ringing in her ears, Amara heard gunfire, automatic weapons, multiple shooters, the sound of Min-jae's estate turning into a war zone. Sung-ho was already moving, gun drawn, but not at them. At the door where his loyalists were storming through. 6 men in tactical gear, faces covered, weapons raised. Min-jae flipped the table, grabbed Amara. Basement. Now. No. Amara pulled the burner phone from her jacket, the one Ife had given her 2 weeks ago with a single number programmed. She pressed send. We're doing this our way. In the basement, Ife was already moving. She'd positioned herself there an hour before dinner, dressed in black, a Glock she'd acquired from one of her Singapore contacts already in hand. Marcus was still chained to the pipe, face bruised but alert, eyes sharp with the kind of clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose. You trust me? Ife asked him, already working the lock with tools that suggested she'd done this before. Do I have a choice? No. The chains fell away. Ife handed him a weapon. But Amara says you were set up. And I believe her. So you're going to help us end the man who tried to kill you. Above them, the gunfire intensified. Amara's phone buzzed. Min-jae's text. 2 words. Atrium. Hurry. They moved through the service corridors, Marcus leading because he knew every inch of this estate, every blind spot, every tactical advantage. The atrium was chaos, shattered glass, bullet holes in marble, for bodies already down. Min-jae fought with brutal efficiency, taking cover behind a pillar, dropping targets with shots so precise they looked choreographed. Then he saw Marcus. For 3 seconds, everything stopped. 2 men who had been brothers, separated by betrayal, an abasement, and 18 months of silence, staring at each other across a war zone. Marcus raised his weapon, aimed past Min-jae's shoulder, fired twice. A Sung-ho loyalist dropped behind Min-jae, dead before hitting the ground. Left side, Marcus said. They fought side by side after that, muscle memory from years of partnership overriding the fracture between them. Marcus covered blind spots Min-jae had forgotten he knew. Min-jae called shots Marcus anticipated before they were fired. 2 men moving like a single organism, destroying the force that had tried to destroy them both. Sung-ho emerged from the smoke, gun raised, aimed at Min-jae's head. You should have killed me when you had the chance. I know, Min-jae said. The gunshot was deafening. But it wasn't Sung-ho's gun. He dropped, clean shot through the temple, execution style, professional. Behind him, stepping out of the shadows in her cream and lavender hanbok, now spattered with gunpowder residue, was Kang Hyejin. The gun in her hand was her dead husband's, a Colt 1911, kept in a velvet box in the traditional room for 30 years. She looked at Sung-ho's body with no emotion. Then at her son. I made you into this, she said quietly. I taught you that love was weakness and trust was suicide. I paid this man to isolate you because I thought isolation would keep you alive. Her voice cracked for the first time in 3 decades. And she gestured to Amara, is trying to unmake everything I built. I don't know which of us loves you more. Min-jae stared at his mother. You financed this. I financed him. To eliminate threats. To keep you hard. Hyejin lowered the gun. But he went too far. And chaos serves no one. She set the weapon on the floor. Stepped over Sung-ho's body. Walked toward the door. Where are you going? Min-jae asked. Somewhere you won't have to choose between your mother and your wife. She paused at the threshold. I saved you tonight. That's the last thing I can give you. She disappeared into the smoke. Min-jae stood in the ruins of his estate, Marcus alive beside him, Amara emerging from the corridor, and his mother's ghost finally exorcised. The war was over. The resolution didn't come in a single moment. It unfolded in pieces, like a structure being carefully dismantled rather than demolished. Hyejin left for the countryside estate in Gangwon-do 3 days after the attack. No ceremony. No goodbye. Min-jae arranged the transfer himself. A traditional house overlooking mountains, staff who understood discretion, enough distance that her influence couldn't reach Seoul, but close enough that she wasn't abandoned. Exile dressed as retirement. When Amara asked if he wanted to see her before she left, Min-jae said, "No." She made her choice. "I'm making mine." The car pulled away at dawn. Hygiene didn't look back. Marcus was harder. He sat across from Min-jae in the repaired office 4 days later, face still healing, hands steady on the arms of the chair. "I can't stay," he said. "Even if you forgive me. Even if we fought together. Too much is broken." "I know." Min-jae slid an envelope across the desk. New identity. Apartment in Busan overlooking Haeundae Beach. Clean passport. Enough money that you'll never have to work for people like me again. Marcus opened it. Stared at the documents. "Why?" "Because you were right. I was turning into a ghost. And you tried to save yourself instead of drowning with me." Min-jae's voice was quiet. "That's not betrayal. That's survival. We can't go back to what we were." "No. But we don't have to be enemies either." Min-jae stood. Extended his hand. "Brothers don't have to live in the same house." Marcus took it. They shook. Once. Firm. Final. He left that afternoon. 2 weeks later, Min-jae's phone buzzed with a photo. Ocean view. Sunrise. A coffee cup on a balcony railing. No caption needed. Sungho's network took 3 weeks to dismantle. Shell companies dissolved. Loyalists absorbed into other organizations or exiled. The 890 million Korean wons he'd stolen was recovered and redistributed to the families of men who died in the atrium. The council sent a formal letter acknowledging Min-jae's handling of the crisis. Park Jin-woo called personally to say, "Your wife is an asset. Don't forget that." The estate got quieter. Repairs took 6 weeks. New windows, refinished marble, a security system that Ifei personally vetted before she returned to Lagos with a promise to visit and a warning. "You heard her, and I have friends in 17 countries who know how to make people disappear." Amara started learning Korean properly. Min-jae started coming to breakfast every morning. They talked, real conversations, not logistics. About his father, about her mother, about the fact that they'd both married strangers and somehow, through blood and conspiracy and a gun that had lowered just enough, had found something that felt like choice. The pregnancy was discovered on a Tuesday in October. Amara had suspected for 2 weeks, but waited to confirm before telling him. She found him on the East Wing balcony at dawn, coffee in hand, watching Seoul wake up in layers of smog and possibility. "I'm pregnant," she said. He turned, stared at her like she'd spoken a language he was still learning to understand. Then, slowly, he crossed to where she stood and placed his hand on her stomach, still flat, nothing visible yet, but the potential of everything. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. Not to her. To the life they'd accidentally created. "Neither do I." Amara covered his hand with hers. "We'll figure it out." He kissed her then. Not the efficient, transactional kisses of their first 18 months, not the mechanical performance of a marriage built on contracts. This was slow, careful, real. The kiss of 2 people who had survived a war and chosen each other in the aftermath. They stood like that for 11 minutes, the same amount of time they'd held hands in the restaurant where his father died. A symmetry neither of them mentioned, but both understood. Below, in the estate driveway, a black Mercedes idled. Inside, a former Sungho lieutenant named Kwon Jae-sung, man who had survived the purge by being in Shanghai during the attack, made a phone call to a number in Busan. Not to Marcus, to someone else. Someone patient. "The boss is distracted," Kwon said in Mandarin. "His wife is pregnant. His mother is exiled. His guard is gone. He thinks he's won." The voice on the other end was cold. Amused. "Let him think that. We'll move when he's comfortable." Kwon hung up. Drove away. The war wasn't over. It had only changed shape, the way wars always do. Old enemies replaced by new ones. Old wounds replaced by scars that would split open when tested. But on the balcony, Min-jae and Amara didn't know that yet. Or maybe they did, and had decided that some things, love, partnership, the terrifying vulnerability of building a life with someone, were worth the risk. For the first time in his life, Kang Min-jae wasn't facing the future alone. And that, Amara thought as his hand pressed against the promise of their child, was worth every dangerous thing that had brought them here.